Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Tom, and today we're going to be talking about the author of Wuthering Heights, a woman by the name of Emily Bronte. One of the Bronte sisters, Charlotte and Anne, are the other sisters, and I guess she only wrote one novel, this particular novel, Wuthering Heights. And Charlotte Bronte, I believe, she's the one who wrote Jane Eyre, right?
Right.
And I don't know what Anne wrote. I could probably,
I don't think it was quite as popular, but it's interesting to have one family with these girls who all turn out to be novelists. And these books are considered to be classic, right? So we're going to be talking about Emily Bronte's book, Wuthering Heights. We talked about the plot in day 1 of our literature unit. As we always do in day 2, we talk about the background or the author's life, her story or his story, depending on the author. Right now, as we always do, we're going to read through today's article. Stay tuned.
Emily Bronte, the author of Wuthering Heights, was born in 1818. She was the 5th of 6 children and the middle child of the literary Bronte sisters, Charlotte and Anne. The Bronte sisters, along with their brother Branwell, were educated at home after their eldest 2 sisters contracted tuberculosis at school and died at a young age. Raised by their father and aunt, the siblings were often left to their own devices. Accordingly, their literary pursuits began at a young age. The children created imaginary worlds for themselves and wrote poems, stories, and plays based on these creations. These literary pastimes eventually turned into careers for the sisters. Emily Bronte herself was the most reclusive of the 3 sisters. Though she attended school later in her teenage years, she had trouble conforming to the school's strict routines and discipline. Living away from her family home and its sense of freedom affected her health, and in the end, she returned home to help care for the household. Bronte spent her remaining years at home, where she penned Wuthering Heights and spent much of her time walking in the surrounding moors. Only a year after her novel was published, Bronte contracted tuberculosis and died at the age of 30. When Wuthering Heights was published in 1847, it held little promise for Bronte. The novel, Bronte's sole work, was considered shocking and inappropriate for the time, both for its uninhibited descriptions of passion and love and the cruelty of its characters. Despite these initial criticisms, the novel went on to become an iconic piece of English literature. The novel's themes, symbolism, and structure continue to be studied, yet it is Catherine and Heathcliff's intensity that makes Wuthering Heights the unforgettable piece of literature it is today.
Okay, guys, let's talk about Miss Emily Bronte, the author of Wuthering Heights. She was born back in 1818. That's the 19th century. She was the 5th of 6 children and the middle child of the literary Bronte sisters, Charlotte and Anne. I know that we were talking about, Tom and I were talking about what they wrote, like what did Anne write? She wasn't the most popular of the 3 sisters, but yeah, she published as well. I looked it up. She wrote a couple of books, but her book that was probably better known was The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. But my advice is to focus on Emily and Charlotte, who wrote Jane Eyre. Those are the 2 most famous sisters. Now, let's talk about their family. They had lots of girls. The Bronte sisters, along with their brother Branwell, were educated at home after their eldest 2 sisters contracted a disease called tuberculosis, or as we refer to it nowadays, we just call it TB. It's a disease that affects your lungs. And it was very serious back then. Nowadays, we get vaccinations or shots to help us escape getting tuberculosis. It's still on the earth, though, because some countries don't have vaccinations. Got to be careful with tuberculosis. The two eldest sisters, the oldest ones in the family, died at a very young age.
So I guess tuberculosis is contagious. So they contracted tuberculosis when they went to school, and therefore they died at a young age. And remember, tuberculosis in Chinese, just for your references, 肺结核. So we don't have to go through some lengthy explanation about tuberculosis. And of course, she was growing up with her sisters and with their brother Bramwell. They were quite close. And as a result, they began their kinds of literary pursuits. And if something is talking about something being literary, that means it has to do with writing books and stuff like that, poems, prose, poetry, stuff like that. That's all part of literary pursuits or literature. Literary, of course, is the adjective form. So this family was very literary in nature. So we've got 3 of them left now, or excuse me, we've got 4 if we count the boy. And raised by their father and aunt, the siblings were often left to their own devices. So we've got the 3 Bronte sisters, Charlotte, Anne, and Emily, and Bramwell, the brother, and they played together, and the parents weren't really around. The father and the aunt had to raise them. We don't really know why the mother's not here. Maybe she died herself.
She died young, yeah.
She did? Okay. So I guess the father had too much to do. He had to work and stuff, and the aunt, she probably had other responsibilities, so they kind of just couldn't really pay much attention to the kids, so they left them to their own devices. If someone is left to their own devices, that just means, hey, you're on your own. We can't be there to supervise you. You're going to have to figure it out yourself.
Yeah, a lot of kids, you know, their parents are busy working, and maybe they are just expected to kind of amuse themselves, entertain themselves, because they were left to their own devices, meaning the kids could choose what they wanted to do. Accordingly, or because of that, they started to pursue literature at a young age. They loved making up stories. They were very creative kids. So the children created these imaginary worlds for themselves and wrote poems, stories, and plays based on these creations. Branwell, the brother, was included in this. They all like to play together, making up things. If you have an imaginary world, it's something you've created in your mind that doesn't really exist. And if you have a great imagination, you're someone who can just create another world that's just kind of fascinating. One author that I think is very imaginative, that's an adjective form of that, is J.K. Rowling. I mean, wow, she created a whole world with her Harry Potter novels. Well, these kids kind of like to just create life that didn't really exist anywhere else except in their own minds. Now, these literary pastimes eventually turned into careers for the sisters because they started writing books, and as they did back in those days, they published under a male pen name. They didn't use their female names because back then, women weren't supposed to be doing that sort of thing. So they actually published their novels using a different name other than their own, which was a male name, a guy. It looked like a guy had written the books. A pastime is something you do in your free time, something that you really enjoy. One of my favorite pastimes, of course, is watching baseball on TV. Tom, you prefer soccer and I think bicycling.
Not as much as before, but yes, I have various pastimes. Studying languages and yes, playing keepy-uppy and things like that.
What's keepy-uppy?
That's like freestyle football where you try to keep the soccer ball aloft, bounce it off your feet, your legs, your head, etc. So that's kind of the kind of soccer I'm into, but that's my own personal pastime if I have time for that. Kind of a hobby, but so this is kind of their hobby, their pastime when they were kids, and eventually these all turned into careers for the sisters. However, the boy, I think, did try writing and portrait painting as well, but he ended up swimming in the bottom of a whiskey glass.
Oh, dear. He liked to drink. Actually, Branwell's portrait of his sister, Emily Bronte, is the only portrait that we know for sure is of her.
No.
So I thought he did a pretty good job. If you look Emily Bronte up on Wikipedia, you can see his painting of his sister. So sadly, Branwell didn't do as well as his sisters. Let's move on to the next paragraph here. Emily Bronte herself was the most reclusive of the 3 sisters. If you're reclusive, you can also be referred to as a recluse. That's the noun form of that that word, it means you avoid being around other people. In fact, if you read Wikipedia, she would be at some sort of social event, maybe a dinner or a party, and the person sitting next to her, would try to talk to Emily, and she'd turn her back on them. She didn't even want to look at them. So she was extremely shy. It was uncomfortable for her to talk to other people. She mainly just socialized with her own family members. So again, if you see that word recluse, it's a man or a woman who likes to just be isolated. They like to be away from other people. Maybe they go and live in a cabin on top of a mountain where nobody else is. But she was quite shy, didn't like to be around other people.
Very antisocial.
Yeah.
And so she was reclusive. And it says here, though she attended school later in her teenage years, she had trouble conforming to the school's strict routines and discipline. So here we have the phrase to conform to, which means basically you accept something and then you obey the rules. You conform to the rules, conform to the laws, for example. Basically, they had strict routines there, I guess, because you have to get up at a certain time. You have to do school chores. You have to do this. You have to do that. You have to dress a certain way. You can't address the teacher using certain words and stuff like that. But hey, she grew up with a vivid imagination and she just couldn't fit in with those routines. She did not conform to them, so I suppose she was getting in trouble. They also had rules on discipline in which people are trained in order to behave a certain way. You need discipline in the military, for example. You can't let all those soldiers have their own opinions. You have to train them to obey the rules and to understand their code of conduct. And if you don't, you can be severely punished. Drop and give me 25.
25 push-ups if they don't obey. Sometimes their I don't know, their supervisor or their military leader will tell them to drop and do those push-ups or sit-ups or whatever. I wanted to mention you need a lot of self-discipline. You'll often see self in a hyphen. That's that little dash added in front of discipline to talk about someone who is able to control themselves. And maybe you have a lot of self-discipline and you can get up early, maybe work out or study harder before you have a test. It's not always good if someone else has to force you to do those things. If you have self-discipline, you're usually more successful in life. Right now, guys, we're going to take a few minutes, listen to our Chinese teacher, and then we'll be back to talk more about Emily Bronte.
大家好，欢迎收听 English Digest， 我是哈利。今天我们要阅读的文章是 Unit 15文学单元的第2天课程。在今天的课程中，我们将会了解小说 Wuthering Heights 的作者 Emily Bronte 的生平背景。首先，文章的第一段提到 Emily Bronte 和她的手足是在家接受教育，原因是我们看到第一段第3句的后半部分 After their eldest 2 sisters contracted tuberculosis at school and died at a young age， 在他们最年长的2位姐姐于学校感染肺结核并年纪轻轻就过世后，动词 contract 有感染疾病的意思，用法是 somebody contract 某疾病，就相当于 somebody catch 或 come down with 某疾病。例如 Tim contracted a tropical disease while he was working abroad。 提姆在国外工作时染上了热带疾病。另外，动词 infect infect 也有感染疾病的意思，但使用时要注意，如果以疾病当主词，要用主动语态；以人当主词，要用被动语态。也就是某疾病 infect somebody， 或 somebody be infected with 某疾病。例如 The Ebola virus infected thousands of people in West Africa in 2014。 西非有数千人于西元2014年染上伊波拉病毒，就相当于 thousands of people in West Africa were infected with the Ebola virus in 2014。 我们接着看第一段的第4句 Raised by their father and aunt, the siblings were often left to their own devices。 由父亲及姑姑抚养长大的这些兄妹常常被放任着自由发展。名词 device 有器具、装置、方法的意思。片语 leave somebody to their own devices 意思是 leave somebody alone to do whatever they want， 也就是不去管某人，让他自己做他想做的事。要注意的是，不要混淆 device 和 divides。 Device 是名词，结尾是 ce， 发音是 device， 字尾是 s 的音。Device 是动词，是设计、发明的意思，结尾是 se， 发音是 devise， 字尾是 z 的音。我们接着看到第一段的第5句 Accordingly, their literary pursuits began at a young age. 因此，他们对文学的爱好从很年轻就开始了。名词 pursue 在本句是指 an activity that you often spend time doing for pleasure， 也就是爱好、消遣的意思，相当于 hobby 或 interest。例如 My sister enjoys reading, writing, and other quiet pursuits. 我妹妹喜欢阅读、写作和其他静态的消遣。Pursue 也有追赶、追求的意思。片语 in pursuit of something 就是指追求或追赶某事物。例如 The celebrity is willing to do anything in pursuit of wealth and fame. 为了追求财富和名声，这位明星愿意做任何事。文章的第2段提到 Emily Bronte 是 Bronte 姐妹中最不会和其他人来往的一个。我们看到第2段的第2句 Though she attended school later in her teenage years, she had trouble conforming to the school's strict routines and discipline. 虽然她在青少年时期后期有去上学，但她对遵守学校严格的常规与纪律有困难。本句用了一个句型 have trouble 加 VING， 表示做某事有困难或麻烦，相当于 have difficulty, have problems, have a hard time 加 VING。 例如 Jessica is so fond of sweets that she has difficulty losing weight. 杰西卡如此喜欢甜食，以至于她减重有困难。另外这句还有一个动词 conform， 意思是遵照、遵守。片语 conform to something 就是指遵照或遵守某事物，相当于 abide by。 abide A-B-I-D-E， comply with comply C-O-M-P-L-Y， observe O-B-S-E-R-V-E， obey O-B-E-Y。 例如 All drivers have to abide by the traffic rules or they will be fined。 所有的驾驶都必须遵守交通规则，否则他们会被罚款。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, everybody, let's continue talking about the life and times of Emily Bronte. During the break, I was doing a little bit of reading about the Bronte family, and gee, they all kind of suffered tragic deaths.
Yeah.
I think Charlotte died in her 30s, and even Anne was only 29 when she passed away. So they all died pretty much young. So
Very
my goodness,
sad.
I guess that's kind of a lesson for all of us. Don't pursue a career in writing because you're going to die young if you do.
Where do you get that connection? No.
Oh, that's stretching it, of course. But
medicine was non-existent back then.
Back then, yes, they had some other problems to deal with. But in any case, where we left off, we were talking about Emily attending school when she was in her later teenage years, when she was 17, 18, 19 or something like that. But she could not conform to the routines and the discipline of the school, and living away from her family home and its sense of freedom affected her health, and in the end, she returned home to help care for the household. So she lived away from her family home, attending school, but hey, she missed school. Hey, I was happy there with my sisters and my brother. We got to write all sorts of stories, and we had lots of freedom there. So the family home had a sense of freedom, and because she was away from that, it affected her health. She'd get sick, she'd get colds, and she'd get the flu and things like that, and she'd get depressed. So she said, hey, enough of this. I'm going home. So she returned home to help care for the household, and the household, of course, refers to the entire home, the building itself, doing the chores, the cooking, the chores and stuff like that, but also taking care of the people in it, the entire household.
Right. So she spent her remaining years at home where she wrote or penned. You can use that word pen as a verb to pen something. Your pen name is the name that you publish under. And I mentioned already that she used a male name to publish Wuthering Heights. She was almost unknown during her lifetime. It was after her death that her writing became very popular, and she's considered to be one of the top female writers of all time now. So she spent a lot of her time wandering around outside. She loved the outdoors. She loved to be alone, and she would just walk around the surrounding moors where she lived. So if it's surrounding you, it's all around you. Like I said earlier, she wasn't social. She was antisocial. Nowadays, if you're antisocial, you're probably in your room playing video games and not talking to anyone. But back then, of course, they didn't have computers. You were probably just, at home, didn't attend many social events. Only a year after her novel was finished and published, she contracted tuberculosis and died at the age of 30. Back then, they didn't use that word tuberculosis. They used the word consumption, which I always wondered what that was when I was a kid. What's consumption? But it would consume you or kind of take your life. But we now know it was tuberculosis, and she died at the very young age of 30. She died earlier than her older sister, Charlotte.
Okay, so they probably called it consumption because they didn't really know what it was, and as they discovered what caused it and stuff, then they came up with a more scientific name. So in any case, she died quite young. And when Wuthering Heights was published way back in 1847, it held little promise for Bronte. So yes, even though she was writing under a pseudonym, the name of a man or something like that, it was published. That means it was printed and made into books and offered for sale at bookshops all over the British Isles. And still they thought, well, they aren't really expecting it to sell very well. It showed little promise. Promise means potential for the future. So they kind of thought that this book wasn't going to sell very well.
Yeah, so this novel was her only novel that she wrote. She did write some poetry, just so you know, but sole means only. So this was her sole work, and it was considered shocking and inappropriate for the time, which is amazing. Because these girls were not loose women back then. They never got married. They didn't know much about having relationships with guys even. But back then, the novel was shocking, which probably means it sold or did quite well because people back then didn't have a lot of shocking literature available. Inappropriate just means it's not right for a certain group of people, maybe young kids or things like that. It had some uninhibited description of passion and love, and also cruelty was in it. Remember, Heathcliff was very cruel to people in it. If it's uninhibited, it's not restrained. You can do what you feel like. We often talk about people who drink. They become uninhibited. They'll do things they wouldn't normally do if they are not, drinking alcohol, which changes some of the decisions you make. So she did very well after the book, but like we said, she died shortly after its publication, so she never got to see how successful her book was.
It almost sounds like this is a dirty book.
Yeah, it's not at all.
Uninhibited descriptions of passion? Yeah. Does that mean it's kind of pornographic or something like that?
No, not at all. No.
Okay, well, I guess at least based on the times, maybe her descriptions of the relationships between these characters was something that had not been done before. So,
well, remember back then, women and men didn't even touch each other except the men would kiss your hand. That was it. You couldn't touch them. Right.
Wow, so the book would have been considered dirty if she described a scene in which the man and the woman were holding hands.
Or maybe I can't remember if he even kisses Catherine.
Ooh, kissing.
Whoa,
ooh,
I know.
Wow, that would have been very shocking. And it was also considered inappropriate, which means not suitable for the general public because it had these descriptions of passion, and also because of the cruelty of the characters. I guess before that, people were nice in books and stuff like that, but in this particular book, they're mean to each other.
Right.
And I guess that was considered kind of shocking for people at the time. We see that all the time nowadays. We expect that. But despite these initial criticisms, the novel went on to become an iconic piece of English literature. So these were the initial criticisms when the book was published, and then people were writing reviews about it. They made these comments that basically said it's too shocking, it's inappropriate, these descriptions of passion are uninhibited, we can't let our kids know about this kind of stuff. So these were the initial criticisms. Initial means what happened at the very beginning, and criticisms are basically what critics say about something when it comes out.
Yeah, you can also use initial as an adverb. I would say initially, when I came to Taiwan, I didn't really enjoy eating
Chou tofu.
No, let me say I didn't initially enjoy eating a lot of bamboo. But now it's fine. I can eat it. I'm great with it. So that's what first happened. But we know that eventually, after that initial criticism period was over, that novel became very popular and today is considered one of the all-time classics. So she has done very well with her novel. There are themes in the novel. There's symbolism, and the structure of the novel was kind of unique for back then. And we continued to study the novel. We used it in one of my literature classes to study English literature. So if you don't get that opportunity in one of your classes, I would say pick up this novel and give it a read. It's really quite good.
Right, we've got the symbolism, things that represent things and the way it's structured and the storyline and stuff like that. They're studying it in universities all over the world. Yet, it is Catherine and Heathcliff's intensity that make Wuthering Heights the unforgettable piece of literature it is today. So Catherine and Heathcliff are the main characters of this book. They have this intensity in their feelings toward each other. Intensity means the high degree of which something is displayed, an intense relationship, for example, with lots of passion, maybe a lot of fighting too. And it's an unforgettable piece of literature. If you read it, you'll never, ever forget it because it is that good. And we're going to begin to talk about some of the themes and ideas of this novel in our next program. But we can't do that now because we've got to wait another day to do that. So right now, we're going to finish our lesson by listening to, once again, our Chinese teacher.
文章的最后一段提到 Wuthering Heights 一出版时并不受到欢迎，因为对当时的读者而言，小说对感情的描述太过激烈，也把人性残酷的一面描述得太详细。我们看到最后一段的第3句 Despite these initial criticisms, the novel went on to become an iconic piece of English literature. 尽管有最初的这些批评，这本小说接着成为英国文学一件代表性的作品。介系词 despite 是尽管、虽然的意思，就相当于 in spite of 后面接名词或 VING， 然后逗号，再接一完整句子。例如 Despite encountering several setbacks in his career, Peter never gave up. 尽管彼得在他的职业生涯中遭遇过数次挫折，但他从未放弃。以上就是今天的课程，谢谢大家收听。
Well, that's it for day 2, guys. We hope you'll join us again. Our next program, we're going to be talking about some of the themes, some of the ideas that are inside this novel. What was it that Emily Bronte was trying to communicate? We're going to kind of take a look at that. So we hope you'll join us then. For English Digest, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Tom. Goodbye.
Bye.